have a very special painting for you this week. This video is probably going to be a little bit longer than usual, which I know is kind of a drawback. Some of you have been giving me some feedback, which I very much appreciate, because I'm trying to expand the audience for these videos so that they can become more accessible for everyone. So I appreciate your feedback. But there's so much to analyze in this painting, and this is considered one of the most complex, and it's one of the most widely analyzed paintings in history. This is the Arnolfini Portrait by the Flemish painter Jan van Eyck. This was painted in 1434. It's an oil painting on oak panel, and this was actually one of the first oil paintings ever. Artists, before they painted with oil, typically painted with egg-based tempera. And Van Eyck was very revolutionary, not just in painting with oil, but for this newfound concept of illusionism. And illusionism is the artistic method of giving the illusion of physical space in paintings. And Van Eyck did this particularly by invoking the use of light. And this is hard for modern viewers to appreciate, because we look at a painting like this and we think, well, what's so special about this? But back in the 15th century, when this was painted, this was extremely unusual. You think of the types of paintings that the viewers would have been used to, the medieval paintings, they were very two-dimensional, they were very flat. And as the Renaissance spread south, this artistic technique became more popular, but Van Eyck is credited with being the first artist to employ it, and considered by many art critics to be also the best at it. So let's look now specifically at the two figures in this painting. The identity of these two is, in and of itself, very contentious among art critics. It was originally believed to be a portrait of Giovanni di Arrigo Arnolfini and his wife, Giovanna Chianami, in their Flemish home in a bedchamber in Brugge. But then it was later established, actually in 1997, that those two, and this is just based on historical records, that they were married in 1447, which was 13 years after the date on this painting, and it was actually 6 years after Van Eyck had died. So that hypothesis didn't really make sense. Now what most art critics believe is that this is a depiction of Giovanni di Arrigo, or maybe his cousin Giovanni di Nicolai Arnolfini, and an unknown wife of either of those two men. It could also be, well, according to a recent proposal, it could also be Giovanni di Nicolai's first wife, Costanta Trenta, who had died actually in February of 1433, in which case this would be what we would call a memorial painting, where one of the depicted people is alive and one of them is dead. But most likely, most artists see this, or most art critics see this as a commemoration of marriage, possibly actually a legal record of marriage, and we'll discover that in a little bit more detail shortly. Now, the interior room has multiple signs of wealth. That brass chandelier is extremely large. It's very elaborate, even by contemporary standards, and that would have been very expensive. The convex mirror that's against the back wall is a little bit interesting in that it's anachronistic. It's shown larger than these mirrors could actually be made at the time that this was painted. Over on the left-hand table and or the left side of the painting, on a table and on the windowsill, are some oranges, which are just sort of casually placed there. These can also be construed as a sign of wealth. Oranges were very expensive in Burgundy, which is the region that is depicted here. And it could also have been one of the items that was brought into Burgundy by Arnolfini, who was a wealthy merchant. You can see more signs of luxury in the elaborate bed hangings. Those were probably held up by iron rods that were suspended from the ceiling. Actually, the chandelier probably would have been suspended from the ceiling as well, and there would have been a pulley system to lower it down to the floor so that the candles could be changed. But for whatever reason, Van Eyck has left the pulley system out of the painting, probably just for lack of space. There's carvings on the chair that's located in the back of the painting, behind the woman and kind of partially hidden by the bed as well. And these wood paintings would have been expensive, another sign of wealth. And then you have a small oriental carpet on the floor by the bed. These oriental carpets, even today in the Netherlands, are very expensive. The view in the mirror is interesting because it shows two figures just inside the door that the couple are facing. The second figure, who is wearing red, is presumed to be the artist, Van Eyck. But unlike paintings by Velázquez, like in Las Meninas, which we haven't looked at, but maybe we'll look at in the weeks to come, Van Eyck doesn't appear to be painting in his reflection, like Velázquez liked to do. Also, notice right above the mirror that the painting is signed, inscribed, and then dated. And it says, the inscription is Johannes de Eyck fuit hic 1434, which is actually Latin for Jan van Eyck was here, 1434, which always kind of cracks me up because you always see graffiti on, bathroom stalls, so-and-so is here. And originally, that came from this painting. The placement of the two figures themselves really represents the conventional 15th century views of marriage and gender roles in this society. The woman is near the bed, which is symbolic of her role as the caretaker of the house and also as the means of reproducing the family. Whereas Giovanni, he's standing near the open window. That's symbolic of his role in the outside world. He's a working man. Giovanni is looking directly at the viewer while his wife is gazing more obediently at her husband. Also, Arnolfini's hand is vertically raised, which could represent his commanding position or his position of authority over his wife, while she has her hand lower in a horizontal, more submissive position. But also notice that her gaze at her husband can in a way show equality to him because she's not looking down at the floor like lower class women would have been expected to do. One thing that a lot of viewers immediately think is, oh, well, she's pregnant, but that's actually not believed to be true. Art historians will point to a lot of other paintings from this time of female virgin saints that are actually similarly dressed. And it was believed to just be fashionable for women's clothing at the time to be kind of puffy like that in the front. And in a sense, the more clothing that a person wore, the more wealthy they were assumed to be, which is another indication of the wealth of this couple. Also, Giovanni Canami, who was the traditional identification of the woman according to most scholars, died childless, as did Costanza Trenta, which was Giovanni de Rigno's cousin's deceased first wife, which, as we said, was the more recently agreed upon identification of the woman. So, considering the fact that both of them died childless, it doesn't seem likely that Van Eyck would have painted her as pregnant in this painting. Her gesture is more likely an indication of the desire of the couple for fertility and for their progeny. There is a pair of cast-aside patent clogs, actually two of them, which could be a symbol of respect for this wedding ceremony taking place on hallowed ground. Husbands also traditionally presented their brides with clogs, so we can see them as more of a sign of domestic stability and tranquility. Behind them, the curtains on the bed have been opened, which might allude to the physical act of love, perhaps, between the married couple. And then you have a dog in the foreground, which could symbolize loyalty, although some art critics say that it's actually an emblem of lust, another a sign of the couple's desire to have a child. Also, dogs were often given as gifts from husbands to their wives, and many wealthy women had in the court lapdogs as companions, and you've probably seen that in movies before. One interesting thing, let's look at the chandelier now more closely, is there's a single candle in the left rear holder of this 7-branched chandelier. It's lit in full daylight, which could be indicative of the sanctuary lamp in a church, which is lit continually as a symbol of the continual presence of God, the ever-present eye of God. Alternatively, if we assume that the woman depicted is Costanza Trenta, who died, making this the memorial painting with one living figure and one dead, well then that single lit candle notices on Giovanni's side, which contrasts with a burnt-out candle whose wax stub you can just barely see on his wife's side. So there's another metaphor also that's commonly used in literature. Arnolfini lives on while his wife had died. And finally, there's a carved figure of St. Margaret on the bedpost, the patron saint of pregnancy and childbirth. On the mirror, there are some small medallions. I guess that wasn't the last thing I was going to say. The medallions on the frame of the mirror show scenes from the Passion of the Christ. And as I said before, the mirror is reflecting two figures in the doorway, and I'll just leave you with one final thought. Two witnesses were traditionally required at a wedding to make it legal, to make the wedding considered legitimate. So, in a way, if we see this as a commemoration of a wedding, or even as a legal document of the wedding itself, we now have two witnesses present, depicted in the reflection within that convex mirror, and we also have Van Eyck's signature on the wall, which could perhaps represent some sort of actual documentation of an event, a marriage, at which he was actually present. This is truly one of my favorite paintings. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Have a great week, everyone, and we'll see you again next week. And please, please don't forget to subscribe. It only takes a second, and it is well worth it, I promise. Have a great week, everyone. Thanks for watching.